Can you guys tell me if this is playing right side up in your Facebook Live? I'm recording this with the other camera as well, but I wanted to see if I could put it in landscape and it would still allow a decent broadcast without turning me sideways. So you guys let me know one way or the other. I'm recording with the other camera so I can upload to the subscription service later, but I was sitting around the house and thinking about something. I was playing Candy Crush on the computer, and I put on the Grateful Dead on YouTube, was playing a host of tracks from various years, just listening to it, and I started to think about some of the influences I've had over the years and stuff that I'm trying to convey and communicate to students. I never had a chance to see the Grateful Dead. When I graduated in 1995 was, I think, the last year that the Grateful Dead played. I had never listened to them. I didn't know anything about them. It wasn't until I was in college where I started listening to Fish at one point and started to get a couple bootlegs here and there, a couple of recordings. And I did not have a chance to see them, but after listening to a handful of recordings, I started getting more recordings, started, listening to them more in depth. And the thing about the Grateful Dead is they had this long 30-year career. So when you think about a musician like Picasso, who had a very long career, which I think was at least 30 years, Picasso's known for this blue period. He's known for this one little era of his music, of his painting, even though he, stylistically changed over the years. The Grateful Dead were much the same. The Grateful Dead were forged in the late 60s in the acid tests. So LSD at that time was not illegal. People were paying a small fee to go to these acid tests and to drink their, Kool-Aid. And then the joke was, whether you could pass the acid test. Well, the Grateful Dead became like the house band, and they were basically forged in this inferno of the late 60s and LSD. They came from all walks of music. Phil Lesh, their bassist, I think was a trumpeter, and then literally, a week before his first Grateful Dead show, picked up a bass and was adding bits of almost classical improvisation into what the Grateful Dead did, which was kind of Americana. If you look at their musicians, they kind of went all over the map, from rock to blues to R&B, that sort of thing. So just this mix of musicians. And then as the Grateful Dead grew, what happened was the Grateful Dead built a really loyal following of what we think of as hippies in the West Coast. These people were so crazy about what the Grateful Dead did that they were willing to travel to follow the Grateful Dead to the next show. The Grateful Dead hooked into this hardcore following of their fans on the West Coast, and then slowly over time, the recording industry came along and said, hey, we've got to package this, we've got to sell this, there's this hippie sound coming out of the West Coast, out of San Francisco. The Grateful Dead are part of that. We can make money by packaging this and selling it. The Grateful Dead eventually had a gold record, which they promptly took out into the desert and shot. Because the Grateful Dead were never about making records. The Grateful Dead were about Without a Net. They were about jazz, they were about improvisation, and they were musicians who came from all across the spectrum that had the technical prowess of jazz musicians. They could improvise on stage, and that's one of the reasons that their fans would follow them around, was because the shows were different, the set lists were different, the versions of the songs were different, the improvisations were different. They were likely to, follow a song and say, hey, let's improvise on a theme for 30 minutes. It wasn't packageable in an album. It couldn't be commodified. It couldn't be stuck on, a 5-minute radio-friendly song. Their two most famous studio albums are Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, which I think come the closest to getting that radio-friendly sort of vibe in that form, in that format. But the Grateful Dead were always, improvisation. As recording capacity and technology grew, Stanley Bear Owsley was their sound guy. Stanley Owsley went to prison for LSD production, okay? So an LSD chemist made enough money to pay for the Grateful Dead's recording equipment and was pushing their sound recording. And they eventually built up into the early 70s of what they called the Wall of Sound, which was this just massive sound system that was supposed to be better than anything that had ever existed. And then, to make a long story short, as recording technology got better, what happened was fans started sneaking in recording equipment. Fans were sneaking recording equipment into the shows to record the live shows that the Grateful Dead were doing, because they were all different. And slowly what happened is, as the band got wind of it, this was a new issue that I don't think had ever existed before, because the recording capacity, the technology had not evolved enough to allow this to happen. So it was like, do we not allow people to do this? This is our music. They're recording our stuff and then selling it or trading it or whatever. And from all accounts that I hear, the Grateful Dead basically said, people are doing what? They're recording the live show? Well, I mean, the people, they paid for the ticket. Why don't we just allow them to do that? Like, it doesn't hurt us. They've already paid for the show. It's their music. Once I play a note and it goes out into the ether, like, do I contain and control that? And basically the Grateful Dead said no. And over time, what happened is they actually created a tapers section. So the people with recording equipment could come in, set up their microphones and stands, their DAT tapes or whatever they were recording with, reel by reel initially, and allow them to record. So what happened is, before the internet, in the 70s, long before viral internet-based marketing, long before Facebook Live, the Grateful Dead allowed their fans to tape and trade their shows, which created an even more rabid fan base of people who wanted to hear every show the Grateful Dead played on the 73 tour. And it's like, oh, they went to Europe in 74 with the Wall of Sound, and I got a recording, in the early 2000s when I was in college of the Wall of Sound with Phil Lesh and Ned Loggin playing a Seastones jam. Ned Loggin was this electronic keyboardist. Guys, this was dissonance. It was 30 minutes of sonic noise that sounded like Sun Ra and his orchestra that went into another 30-minute version of Eyes of the World and ended with Chuck Berry's Around and Around. Music had never seen what the Grateful Dead produced. The Grateful Dead were often, by fans who said, quoted, fans would say, not only are they the best at what they do, they're the only ones who do what they do. The Grateful Dead created their own sound. They created their own fan base of music that was not radio friendly, that could not be easily packaged and monetized. And the Grateful Dead, frankly, never gave a shit about monetizing their music. The Grateful Dead just went out and played more for 30 years and got high, did drugs, did whatever a band did, and were a bunch of anarchists who became millionaires because the people who liked their music were willing to pay for t-shirts, shows, everything the band ever produced. Jerry Garcia, when he died in 95, the band came together for a reunion tour that was made up of all the remaining members and Trey Anastasio from Phish. That series of shows, which might have been 3 or 4 shows, generated over $30 million in the Chicago area. Jerry Garcia had been dead for 20 years, and the remaining members could get together and play a show, and it would sell out. They created a rabid fan base by producing more content than anyone else, and essentially created a sort of pre-internet viral marketing through taping and trading of their shows, which were all distinct, all unique, and my marketing models the Grateful Goddamn Dead. Because they weren't trying to control music. They were trying to create better art, and they were trying to build a more rabid fan base, and they were trying to allow people to know about them, to connect with them, to grow with them. And meanwhile, they were going to give you a sampling of Americana. It was a little bit of rock, a little bit of folk, a little bit of jazz. And it's like, well, what kind of music is the Grateful Dead? People might see a Grateful Dead album cover and it's got skeletons on it and they think it's, metal. It's Queensryche, it's Iron Maiden. And the Grateful Dead were really a hodgepodge of all these different styles of music all thrown together. Sound familiar? A bunch of different modalities all thrown together. Students kept looking at my workbooks and videos and DVDs primarily, and they kept looking at it and saying, well, we thought you did what's here in intro tie. And then I would change it, and we thought you did what was here in table tie. And then I would change it, and they'd say, we thought you did what was here in phase 1, and I would change it. And we thought you did what was here in phase 2, and then now I'm documenting the process much more succinctly in the subscription service, because I can guarantee you it's going to be a little bit different a year from now. And it's going to be even more different 5 years from now. And the art is going to continue to evolve, and I cannot allow someone else to put me in a box. The Grateful Dead put themselves in their own box. It was a brand called the Grateful Dead. Their music had never existed before, and it has not existed since. The bodywork that I'm trying to create is not trying to create a new box for you. In other words, I'm not setting a new set of confines for you to live in. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create a better brand that allows you to grow, respond, and change. When people went to a Grateful Dead concert, they didn't expect rock and roll. They didn't expect funk. They didn't expect soul. They didn't expect drum solos. They expected all of that rolled into this bigger package that had a very distinct sense of its own personality, its own style. Grateful Dead fans did not come to see the top 10. They did not come to see the golden oldies. They went to a Grateful Dead concert to see the Grateful Dead improvise. And that fundamentally is what my sessions are, and that is what my classes are. The capacity to document that process reminds me more and more each day of what the Grateful Dead did. In Asian bodywork in particular, there's a sense of mastery, which I really aspire to, really like that piece. But there's also a sense with American teachers where they're going to teach you the Thai secrets. There's a secret going on. No. There's nothing secret about Jerry Garcia playing a guitar solo, except he loved music and he practiced for most of his lifetime to play the way he did. There's no secret to Asian bodywork. There's no secret to Reboot. None of what I do is a secret. It's still manipulating soft tissue. The closest thing to a secret is you slow down, you breathe, and you actually communicate with the client that you're working on through touch. There's your secret. When students ask about theory, they're always asking about theory because in that intro Thai workbook I talk about sen lines. They think sen lines are these magical lines. No, they're not. Sen lines are a simple map that a teacher gives to the student, much like somebody sat down with Jerry and taught Jerry Garcia some scales. And Jerry Garcia took those scales and practiced and then started to improvise and play jazz. When you sit down and work with people, there's nothing magic about what you're doing. It is based on pain science. We can study and research it more, but we can also sum up a Grateful Dead concert and saying, well, it's a series of notes played in a certain way. It's never going to capture the magic. The real inspiration, improvisation of working on a client, being present with them, breathing and making real connection. That's what a Reboot session is, and I'm packaging it in a way that's not radio friendly. my session is 3 hours long. The other day I went 3 hours and 20 minutes. Doesn't matter to me. It's just another session. And I'm trying to do the best work I can and to educate people in the best way possible. That just happens to resemble one of my heroes. And Jerry's gone. But that spark, that sense of creativity that comes from Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead is something that's a piece. There's a little bit of crack, and that crack let all the light in. It's like the Grateful Dead. You guys have a good Thanksgiving. I'll talk to you soon, and I hope you're doing well out there. Talk to you later. Bye.